This is a demo of a little utility that I wrote. I'm investigating persistence, and I'm looking at the new CRUD functionality that ApplicationCraft has. And my thought at the beginning here was to learn how to do the CRUD, the create, read, update. And when I was wanting to learn that, I thought, it'd be interesting to know how long this takes. How many milliseconds does it take to do a create versus a read versus an update versus a delete? And I wanted to measure other things like how long does it take to get the connection? It might give me an indication if the connection is pooled. But I also wanted to know how long it would, take to do these numerous things of starting a transaction and ending it and everything. So I wrote this little application here. It's just a little toy. And I used two databases. I used the database that ApplicationCraft made available, and I used the database that XEround made available. And they have exactly the same structure. Here is ApplicationCraft, and you'll see the user ID, name, source ID, and created. And over in the XEround, it's user ID, name, source ID, created. So exactly the same stuff. So in this little demo, what I'm doing when I say the number of tests here, the client is going to call to the server and request a certain number of tests. And one test consists of create, read, update, and then delete. And each of those operations, I have assertions to make sure that I only update one record, and that when I do the select, that the value that I get back is the same as the object that I had updated already, and when I delete, that I only delete one object. So I have different assertions going on. Now, what I want to show is running these tests, and there's two options here that are going to be very important, very interesting. But I'm going to turn on the detail right now. The detail just says, rather than just tell me how long a test ran, tell me how long all the individual pieces of that test ran. So let's do 20 tests on AC. We'll start. And now the test runs all in the server. Okay, so the client initiates the test runs totally on the server, all the results are accumulated on the server, and then at the end of the test it's brought back to the client processes the data and builds this chart. Let's run the same thing for XEround. So the total time right here, 1.2 seconds, XEround 1.1 seconds, so faster. But you can see that it's pretty evenly distributed. The green is a create, the blue is a read, the red is update, the yellow is delete. Okay, so I thought, well, there's not much of a difference here. Well, I ran into a problem. When I first started doing this test, I was using the session object. So let's see what happens when we run with a session object. Now I notice it's 1.2 and 1.1, so we'll do XEround first using the session object. I'm not getting detail, just the starting and ending times. So it goes from 1.1 to 2, so twice as long, and go to ApplicationCraft and start the test there. And it was 1.2, and now it comes back 2.6, so more than twice. But look what happens when I say, now accumulate all my detail. Tell me all this detail about the individual pieces of each create, each read, each update, each delete. And watch what happens now. We're going to go 2.6 and 2.1, so about 2 seconds, 2.5 seconds. Let's start with ApplicationCraft. Never change the number of tests, same number of tests, same running, same exact thing. The only difference now is I'm using the session to keep all of the log data. So I'll show you the code in a minute. This is kind of what was interesting to me, and I think it's a bug in ApplicationCraft. So you can see it took 14 seconds. We went from 2.5 seconds to 14 just because I used the session to persist or to contain my array of log events. Let's do the same thing with XEround, because it has nothing to do with the database. This is all ApplicationCraft, this session. This is the use session object or something. So we'll see how long this one takes. Now XEround without the session, even with detail, was 2.1 seconds. And you can see it's taking quite a bit longer. And here we go. It's taking 13 seconds, so it's still faster than AC. But you can see how it just does the same behavior as AC. It's not the database, though. It's AC that's doing this. So let's look at the part of the code that I think is causing the problem. The problem is when I'm setting this log. Okay, now when I toggle that button to use session, I pass that into setting the log. And if I say use the session, I do the SSJ.get session object and I get my log data. If it's null, I initialize it. But then I always do this. I always set what the time is now, and then I basically do a clone of the object, and then I push it into the log data that I got back from the session object. Now, if I don't use the session object, then I have this log data up here that is global, and I just do these 3 lines of code. Set the time, clone it, and then push it onto the object. So the other way, the only other method that's involved in this is in the at the end of the run. This is server-side code. At the end of the run, I will retrieve the log and send it back to the client, and I do that either by getting the value out of the session object, or I do it out of the global variable. And you can see what a tremendous performance hit it is by using the session object. So I learned a couple of things. One, the CRUD stuff rocks, and whether I use XEround or whether I use ApplicationCraft, it doesn't matter, other than XEround has you know, some limits on how much data you have, and I haven't heard what that limit is from ApplicationCraft yet, but performance-wise, not much difference. But what I did learn is if you're going to do a lot of session updates, boy, you better be thinking about it real careful, because the performance right now, at least with ApplicationCraft, really suffers when you use that session object. Hope this helps.